In this edition of Endzone Insights, we will be discussing which conference in college football is truly the best and most dominant, all on Endzone Insights. Welcome back into Endzone Insights, where you can get the best takes from the next generation of football fans. I am your host, Darius Fitzpatrick, and I want to talk about something that I'm sure if you've been keeping up with college football has been a big topic lately, and that is which conference is truly the most dominant. Now, in this conversation that everyone seems to be having right now, no one is mentioning the ACC or the Big 12, and there's a good reason for that. It is because it is always a toss up on who's going to win that conference, and usually only one team each year actually looks worthy of of having a spot in the college football playoff. Last year for the ACC, it was Miami, and last year for the Big 12, it was Texas Tech. So that just leaves the Big 10 and the SEC, the most watched and most celebrated conferences in all of college football. And while the SEC has been the more dominant conference in the history of college football, I have to go with the Big 10 as the best conference in college football. Now, when I say this, I do not mean in its entire history of college football. No, that would most definitely go to the SEC. I'm talking about currently. Right now, the Big Ten is the best conference in all of college football. And I'll explain to you why that is. Now, I'm going to be doing that by looking at through the arguments that people have made on why the SEC is better and show how the Big Ten differs and why that makes it better. First off, the Big Ten has had the last three national championship winners, while the SEC has not even made it to the Natty since 2022. Now, if it was one team that was winning the national championship in the Big Ten, we would not be having this discussion because that would just mean that one single team was dominating the conference. But it's not just been one team, it's been multiple teams throughout the course of the last 3 years, with Michigan, Ohio State, and last year Indiana winning it in the last 3 years. And now I want to bring up something that no one has brought up with the SEC. I love how everyone talks about how dominant the SEC was as a whole during the 2010s and the early 2020s. But if you look at the winners of the national championship since the inception of the college football playoff format, you've had Alabama first in 2015, LSU in 2019, and Georgia in 2021. In an entire decade, when people thought that the SEC was the most dominant conference in all of college football, only three different teams won the national championship. The Big Ten has gotten the same amount of different national champion winners in only 3 years as the SEC has gotten in an entire decade. That doesn't prove to me that they were the best conference at that time and had the best teams overall. It just proves to me that they had the most consistent team at that point in time, which was Alabama. Now, I've also heard in some arguments going around that the SEC is the best conference in college football because they have the best teams top to bottom. And honestly, I thought that was a valid argument to make last season. But then the bowl season happened. And guess what I saw? SEC teams getting stomped on by Big Ten teams. We saw Vanderbilt, who people thought should have been in the playoffs, lose to Iowa. And then we saw Illinois beat Tennessee in the Music Bowl. And then who could forget Indiana absolutely destroying Alabama 38-3 in the Rose Bowl. The only head-to-head match that the SEC actually won against the Big Ten during the postseason was Texas Tech versus Michigan. And Michigan had just fired their head coach not too long before that game, so they're already behind the eight ball in that perspective. And even when not playing the Big Ten, the SEC still struggled as they overall went 4-10 over the course of the bowl season, while the Big Ten went 11-5. So when your teams that are considered to be your depth in the conference they lose, and then the teams that are in the postseason that are considered your top tier teams also lose to other teams that are considered depth, that doesn't show to me that you have the best teams top to bottom. That's not convincing me at all. Now, I want to finish talking about two or more things that others say when talking about whether the SEC or the Big Ten is the best conference. First is how many teams do the two conferences have that can legitimately win a national championship? And I will say this is actually one of the more realistic arguments that I genuinely feel is legitimate. Because when you look at the SEC, you see Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas A&M, and Georgia, and some people, including myself, thinking Ole Miss could also win the Natty. While in the Big Ten, you see Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, and some people saying USC if they put everything together. So it is pretty close on teams that could win the national championship in the conference, with the SEC having five and the Big Ten having four. I feel, however, there is just only one thing that I would say is that when you look at Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon, they have very few questions or flaws to the point where they are clearly favorites right now to win the Natty. I feel that you can't say the same with any team in the SEC, as Georgia is the team with the least amount of flaws in the SEC, and they have big questions about the skill group on offense that could limit how explosive they are. So if you want to use this to say the SEC is better than the Big Ten, I would honestly understand. However, however, it's just hard for me to say it because when I look at the teams like the Big Ten, I think to myself, this could be their year. And when I think about the teams in the SEC, there's always some hesitation to saying something like that because those teams just aren't good as the Big Ten contenders are. And the final argument that I've heard from people about why the SEC is better than the Big Ten is because they produce more NFL prospects. Well, that's great for the NFL. As an NFL fan, I love that. But tell me, are college programs specifically trying to hit a quota of NFL players drafted in order to win games? No, they are not. I am not saying it is not important to have NFL prospects on your roster. It most definitely is. But we see players being drafted for talent that could translate to the NFL, not for what they did in college. If it was like that, then every QB that won the national championship game would be a first round pick. That would also mean that Drake May or Josh Allen would not be a first round pick because when they were in college, their teams were not winning a lot of games. In reality, QBs such as Will Howard go in the sixth round of the NFL draft, despite the fact that he won the national championship game. So you see, just because you have higher prospects doesn't mean you are guaranteed wins against higher tier opponents. The only thing that does guarantee you wins are having players that fit the system they were given at a college program, which does not always result in more draft picks. After saying all that, and knowing that the Big Ten is having more and more teams get better every year while the SEC continues to have teams regress, it is clear that the Big Ten is the best conference in college football. Well, that is going to wrap up this edition of Endzone Insights. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please send it to someone you know. If you feel any differently about anything I said, please put it in the comments section. I love to get fan input on these types of things. When we come back, we'll be continuing the record prediction series in the NFL. And just a few more things I have to say. School is starting back up for me, and because of that, episodes might not be coming out as frequently, and it may take me some more time. However, I will still try and get as many episodes out as soon as I can. And but until then, be safe, be happy, and live your best life.